is Handpick, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
As opposed to a video game where it gets faster and faster as you go on the game, in the older games at least, this one was kind of the opposite. The more you relax, the higher your score cranked, and it was quite a surreal experience.
I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Anthony Jones was general manager of Atari's headquarters in the United Kingdom. Later, he moved to the United States, where he was group product manager in the marketing arm. There, he worked on the Mindlink controller, a controller for the Atari that strapped to your forehead with a headband. Later, he worked at Nolan Bushnell's Catalyst Technologies incubator. This interview took place on September 22nd, 2015.
Tell me how you got started at Atari. How'd you get your job?
Well, I was a director of technology at a company in Northwest London, selling DEC database stuff, and could see that the home computer industry was just about to start up, and I was lucky enough to be contacted by a guy from Ingersoll, a guy called Steve Bernard from Ingersoll, and he was the guy who basically was heading up that, or had that department under him, and was doing the Atari departments. He was doing the 2600 stuff. And then the 400 and 800 computers were sort of appearing, so they called me in to see if I could help them head up the thing that they were very confused about, which was how to market this new category of home computers that was coming down the pipe. And luckily, it was a match, and I was delighted. So I joined them to build a small group of people to market that product in the UK.
Okay, and what title were you given when you were there?
It was basically general manager, I suppose, was how it was positioned. It was kind of a funny thing because we were kind of like a skunk works, and nobody knew quite what to do with us. And if you were around at the time or knew people that were, it was a very strange environment because home computers didn't exist. People that you were either in the mainframe world or you were a total techie. There was no consumer part in the middle. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we had a product that kind of filled that gap before any of the other competitors were out there, which was kind of nice. Right. So I'm not sure when the Commodore VIC-20 was released, but I believe the 400 was out first, and then I think it came out after the 800 was released, but before it had full traction is where I think it was, if I remember correctly.
Let's see. Well, I know the 400 800 came out in 1979,
mm-hmm.
and the VIC-20 was released in 1980. So,
right.
Yeah.
That's about right.
Yeah. So basically, it sounds like, I mean, there was this product being made in the United States, and there was a whole U.S. marketing team, and then it was part of your job to make this thing make sense to a UK audience. Is that right? Yes,
that was true, and it, yeah, that's correct. And it started off more as obviously on the hobbyist side. So there was the first distribution was done. I don't know how much you know of that era, but the first distribution was done through a company on the South Coast somewhere called Maplin Electronics.
Okay.
I think they still exist in some form, but because I've seen the name when I visit England occasionally. They were in the hobbyist and radio hobbyist market. So there was kind of this mesh of the hobbyist side and people that wanted to use home computers to potentially control antennas, and it was the same kind of mentality, and it worked out really well. It was a very, very good match, actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So they were sort of the distributor?
They were a distributor, but they were never in the consumer space. So Atari and Ingersoll were always pushing to go into the primary consumer outlets at the time. Dixon's and people like that. Comet? No, it wasn't Comet. There was a few of them, but Dixon's was the main one I remember.
Okay.
And then because the 2600 had been so successful for that group in Ingersoll, there was, and in England, of course, there was such this thing, Atari's got a new machine out, and it started kind of as a sort of deluxe game machine with that great game called Star Raiders, if you remember it.
Sure, yeah.
So that's just totally awesome, and that really blew everybody away. It's something that hadn't existed before in a sense. So we got really good traction on that, and then people wanted to do more heavier computing, so the 800 and all its accessories came into play.
Cool. So on a day-to-day basis, what were you doing? So kind of get a sense of what your particular job was as general manager.
Oh, on a day-to-day basis, we were, there was, let me just see, there was after the first few months, and then we built a team, there were 4 or 5 of us in a like one of those mobile office things behind WEA Records. Mm-hmm. It was great, and that became our sort of base of operation. We basically did all the support there because that was the only place we could do it. We did the sales of the product through retail. So whenever there was an exhibition, obviously we would be showing at the exhibition. We actually had some TV ads in that first year too, so that was kind of cool. They were from America, I believe, and then redubbed, which wasn't perfect, but it was okay. But because the budgeting was a little bit of a strange affair because I think everybody expected another 2600, and it wasn't quite like that. It was a different animal, and the distribution never quite matched. But we did, in our view, at least, do a reasonably good job because we did get to, as the industry blossomed out, we were certainly the top machine for a long period of time, and probably maybe a year and a half out of those 2 to 3 years I was there before I came to the States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask you about, the competition of hardware that was kind of home, that was home base was in the UK. There was the Sinclair, there was the BBC Micro. How did you guys feel about? Was it a problem for you, or?
Well, it wasn't really. The Sinclair was never the Sinclair was always positioned. There was the kit one, and then there was the, what do they call it? The Z80, the little word processor.
The ZX80.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there was that little white one that was the kit, and then there was the black one with the LCD running across the top, which was used for word processing.
Okay. Yeah.
So those came along, and they didn't really compete in the space that we were in. Our main competition was always Commodore. Mm-hmm. When the Amiga came along, that was when the 800. You could feel that there was going to be challenges. That there was going to be a challenge there.
Right. Well, that was much later.
We didn't quite have that.
Yeah.
When I was there, we were still running pretty flat out at that point, and we were at exhibitions and games and all of the conferences, and I can't remember exactly which one, but we had a competition in a railway station one point where people would come by and play the game as they were coming through the railway station. Coming out of the trains after work. So we had some fun times. We really did.
Nice. Tell me about some of the other expeditions or shows that you went to.
Well, we did there was the ordinary, there was a computer show in Birmingham at that point in time, and we went up to that. We did those special events. There was a whole lot of events around games because there was the Pac-Man challenge and all that stuff the 2600 guys were doing, and we could sort of leverage a lot on the back of that. And the public were very into the computers. England's a great place for personal computers, and so it really did build fabulously. And the growth was pretty phenomenal. We were pretty much strapped for product a lot of the time, which given that was, the intent was to send over as much product as they could and us sell it out, and we pretty much always sold it out, which was interesting considering we were all novices in a novice arena. A bit like when video games first started, nobody quite knew what was what. It was the energy was outrageous. It was phenomenal. I still totally recall it. The director of Maplin joined us after about 3 months. A guy called Graham Daubney, and I don't know if you've spoken to him at all, but he is a great friend of mine, and he took on the kind of the job of making sure that all the clients were, we'd start up a sale and he'd make sure everybody was supported correctly. So we had a good little group. I don't know of any special events other than that. There was that one at the railway station, and then there was always booths when we were next to Commodore or we were right opposite. I don't think Acorn was a big thing at the time from my standpoint. I think the timing, I mean, you perhaps remember that timing or have notes of that timing more than me, but I seem to recall it was slightly after the 800 was released. So it was in the second half rather than the first half of the tenure.
Yeah, I'm less knowledgeable about the UK computers than you might be. So
Okay.
You said you were doing support as well. I mean, you were just doing user technical support from your little trailer.
We were. Wow. And we had one guy in the back who was always doing the support calls, and that worked out fine. The pressure was interesting. The pressure was always on us to go into the mass retail market, and that was one of the intriguing challenges, because in Europe the market is a little bit different. So the retailers make a much more sizable margin and won't touch a product unless they get their full margin. So it was very, very difficult to kind of work it through the system. And we began to get it into distribution, but there was always the pressure to go whole hog and let them do advertising and really take it on. And we, in our little group, we resisted that until the market was ready, and we pretty much nailed that one, because the market was just flipping when I had left. I just left and left and came to America, and at that point in time, it was just going to that point in time when it really needed to go mainstream, and it did, which was great, because Atari took over the distribution at that point in time. So they took it over from Ingersoll, and then we were working directly for Atari in England, and that changed the shape of things a little bit, as you can imagine. Sure,
for the better, or for worse.
Well, none of us had a lot of experience with Americans at that point in time, and the sudden switch from hobbyist to mainline consumer in their mind was a tough act to follow. So their pressure was always get it into the mainstream. That's all the place we want to be, and get the retailers to take 10%. And in Europe, that doesn't happen quite like that. They don't like doing it that way, and it takes a heck of a lot of marketing to make, or took a lot of marketing to make a retail outlet change its basic policies. So we came to some compromises and we got it started. And then once I had left, I know they went whole hog into that realm. So that was great.
So why did you leave for the U.S. to change jobs within Atari, or?
Yeah, I had the opportunity because I could feel that it was at the point where it had to go 100% mainstream. My strength has always been building a business, not necessarily taking it past that point where it changes to my comfort zone. So I love startups and things like that. So I came to the States with Atari to do some new product development over here, which was very interesting. That was the time when if you recall, the 7800 game system was just coming out, and there were some other controllers. There was a headband controller, which is interesting because they're kind of famous now, and that was one of my projects then. And it was fun. It was a very fun time. But then, of course, I was only out here for a year when things drastically changed when Trammell took over Atari.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
All right. So you came out. What was your job title when you came out in '83 or so? I guess.
I was what they call a group project manager, a group product manager. So it was in the marketing arm of, and I ended up generally with the unusual products, because part of what I think I'm pretty good at is making something unusual fit into into the place it has to fit in, and seeing that place early on. So that's really fun. I love doing that. So that was my enjoyment and my challenge there when I came over here.
So one of your unusual products was the Mindlink. Let's talk about that.
That's right. Oh, you remembered the name. Cool.
So this is a headband thing where you can control your game using your mind. So so tell me everything about it and how you tried to just tell me the story.
Oh well, it was an interesting thing. It was a controller that nobody quite knew what to do with, and it was a technology that had been bounced around inside the company, and at that point, I guess they were beginning to feel the stress because that was the same time when a lot of those the 2600 was topping out, right? That was that same kind of era. So I was there, I guess, in the other divisions when they were doing the ET fiasco and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there then, which was an interesting time to come in. So the mind controller, there was a guy in West Virginia who had this technology, a guy, if I remember correctly, called Jim Scudder. And he had invented this... He invented it originally as a relaxation tool, and we kind of were playing with it and realized that we could move things around on the screen quite easily. So we manipulated it on the 400. We got a cartridge made in the 400 so that it would work, and it was phenomenal. I don't know if you ever got a chance to play it. I doubt very many people over here did, but one of the clever things was the more relaxed you were looking at the screen, the easier it was to control it. So your points went as opposed to a video game where it gets faster and faster as you go on the game, in the older games at least. This one was kind of the opposite. The more you relax, the higher your score cranked, and it was quite a surreal experience. We got it working, and then they wanted to put it on the 7800, and that never actually happened. But I know it was an internal project to do that. And then we got it. The interesting thing there was one of those big internal presentations, to all the distributors around the state. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of weird because we had to be up on a stage working the mind controller, which is the exact opposite. I mean, if you can imagine being on a stage inside a big theater and trying to relax, that didn't quite work out, but it was fun and it did work. So, but it never really saw the full light of day.
All right. So tell me about other unusual products that were thrown at you.
Well, that was by far the weirdest one. There was a lot of, the 7800 was out, so there were a lot of games coming through for that. There was no other, let's see, were there any other computers? I can't recall if there were any other computers. I don't remember any other really wacky ones. That was the one that stands out so much in my mind. And even after I'd left Atari, I still had one in the garage and I was playing with it every now and again. It was like the oddest thing. It really was a clever little gadget.
You still don't have it, do you?
I had it. I think at one point about 10 years ago when I had a clean out, I think it went. If I come across it again, I will ping you. I guarantee it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think that there were no other real, really, really odd, intriguing ones that I can recall, at least. No, they weren't. But then then Atari obviously closed down, so I actually joined. Went to work with Nolan Bushnell for a while, and that was fun. I don't know what interests you in this, but it was fun there. So I was working for his
incubator,
Catalyst Technologies, his incubator up in Palo Alto. It was that was a fabulous time. We started up a couple of there was a toy company, and we had those little robot toys, and Androbot was in the next door room to me. All those robots running around. Chuck E. Cheese was starting had just started in the next door office. So you can imagine what a crazy time that was.
Nice. So what were you doing there? I mean, what was your?
I was working on, again, new product development. So I got involved in some of those. They were called the Petsters, those little cat things that ran around autonomously. That was one of mine. I've still got one of those. So that was one of my things, and there were a couple more that we did with them. I can't recall right now, but that was a really, really fun time. And then I transitioned from there into doing some work for a Japanese company, some product development, which was quite fun. And then I got involved in selling Mac stuff over in Japan, Mac software in Japan, and that was an interesting time, very interesting time. So that kind of took me more to the present,
Right.
not to now, but through that whole period of the Macintosh releasing and launching, and then producing products that were for the Macintosh. Do you ever recall the micro TV?
The micro TV? No, I don't know what that is.
Oh, it was an Apple II board. It was the first video in a window board on a computer. So I was actually involved in that company, which was amazing. There were some very talented people there, and we produced that first product. So I've stayed in that sort of Atari and then the Apple side of life. So hopefully that seems to be a connection a lot of people took, actually.
Nice, cool. So okay, as one of probably very few people who saw Atari from the UK side and the America side,
Yeah.
tell me, I mean, what are some differences that might surprise someone who has only seen one side or the other? Either that differences from the consumer side or just from working there. It just, does that make sense?
It does. Well, from working there, and clearly I went from a porter cabin, as they called it, up to a in Borregas, this massive, office complex. So with multiple campuses and things like that. So that was clearly a very, very big difference. The market was different. In Europe, the way it worked in Europe, the market came in much more technically, rather than coming in from the game side, where it could have come in it really did come in from the hobbyist side. Whereas over here, the Apple II came in from the hobbyist side, but the Ataris tended to come in from the gaming side. So it was a very different separation from game to computer over here than it was over in England. I mean, in England they were completely different beasts. Over here, they were kind of viewed as different levels of that growth of that area of the market. So there was an Atari section, whereas in England there was an Atari gaming section and there was an Atari computer section. So that was a big difference. Over here, it tended, when I came over here, at least, it was already in the main stores. So it was a consumer product. It was not anything else. Whereas over there, it was certainly, as I said, a technical hobbyist project that also played great games. So it just worked really, really well. And that was different. That was very different. That was one of the reasons why I didn't really gravitate. I didn't go too hard into the actual marketing place. I was more in the product developing side of the fence, because I could see where products were evolving more than I knew all of the nuances of US marketing needs.
Right.
But that was fine. That didn't cause any problems. Don't know what else. Well, obviously there were differences in structure. I mean, clearly, in the States there were thousands and thousands of people there, and our structure in the UK was literally half a dozen of us. When Atari took over, Atari didn't really know the UK market, so they relied on us. And then when I was leaving, they started a transition in. There was a new president in England, a general managing director called Graham Clark, who came from a computer background, I believe, and a gentleman as director of the computers called Eric Solomon. So you probably heard of those guys. And they came in, and their charter by Atari, they were employed by Atari in Europe, and their charter was to go full bore consumer and make it work. And they did a good job, I understand. But I'd say I'd left the country at that point.
I think the only non-U.S. person I've really talked to so far is Steve Molyneux, who was German software development manager. And
Oh,
so,
yeah. That I don't know him at all. I don't recall him. Oh, I'll tell you, I do know, or still know, but did know. There was a guy that I knew well called, and I met through Atari in Europe, called Chris Horseman, who was bought out to the States by Ray Kassar to be the VP of software development. Do you recall that story?
no, tell me.
That's very interesting. He actually, they could see the writing on the wall on the software, and they needed a new kind of a new face.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very young. I mean, when this all happened, he must have been in his 20s. He worked for a company called Thorn EMI in Europe, and he developed. There was like 4 products, and it's a long time ago, but there was a billiards one, and there was like a tank one. I think there was like 3 or 4 products.
Yeah,
and
Thorn eventually had a lot of Atari software. There was quite a bit of it actually.
There was, but I'm talking about when it first started.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So he came to me, and we actually had his product on our booths because that was the stuff nobody had ever seen before. They couldn't comprehend. I mean, it was like so far out of it. The only problem is it had to be on tapes because they weren't allowed to make cards at that point, cartridges. But they figured it out in the end. So he was the innovator behind those games. So he actually was brought out to the States to head up software development. That caused some interesting wrinkles. I came out just after him. He came over, and the ET thing was already in play, so he didn't have many options on that one. But he stayed out there for a couple of years, and then I guess he went back to England. He's actually doing very well right now in online education for companies, business. I don't know the name of it offhand, but he's doing very well for himself now.
What did you say his name was?
Chris Horseman.
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 Are you in contact with him still?
I know how to contact him. Yeah, I'm certainly on Facebook with him, and I met him a couple of years ago when I was over there. I spent some time with him.
It might be interesting to talk to. You said,
oh yeah, he would certainly have a whole load of stories in addition to mine of that transition. So that would be easy.
Yeah, oh, that'd be good. So you said there weren't
happily introduce you.
Thank you. You said they were not allowed to make cartridges. Were you talking about Thorn EMI or?
Well, at the very beginning, you only had tape access, and the cartridges only came from Atari. Mm-hmm. And there was that whole mentality of, we're the only ones that make cartridges, just like on the 2600. If you remember, there was that whole, So they were not allowed to make cartridges. And I believe they did towards the end, but the ones I was involved in were not cartridges. They were tapes. So you had to kind of plug the tape in and load it in, and 20 minutes later you could play the game. But they were awesome games.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, they really were. And I came over here and met some really cool people over here. And there's somebody. Have you spoken to Russ Wetmore?
Not yet. He's been busy.
Okay. Yeah, he's in Florida right now. He's a great guy, and he wrote this piece of software called Preppy.
Yes, of course.
And when I was in England, there was Russ and a friend of his called Dan Horn, who I guess you have spoken to, who was with Adventure International, and myself. And we were kind of, because I was heading up Atari computers at the time, they had some really interesting software. So I was allowed to sort of leverage their software to help with the machines. So that was a good connection between the States and England while I was still over there. And I think it benefited everybody. And I remember Adventure International with Scott Adams, and that was the big thing that Dan had when I met him. And that great Frogger game called Preppy, that I still can't get the music out of my head. And it's still valid. What is that? The Apple thing last week, there was that Frogger thing from Australia, and it was like, oh wow, full circle.
Right.
So yeah, and that was another joining across the ocean. So it was quite good. And then when I came over here, I kept in touch with them, so that was kind of cool. But it was it was very symbiotic, that for everybody concerned. Everybody was in the right place at the right time, with the whole country wanting that, because it's funny over there, because it's such a smaller country, things, it's much easier to grab hold of a new thing coming in, because you know the shape and size. I mean, you can tell a new industry when it's coming up because of how people feel about something. You can actually sort of, it was palpable. So we knew we had something, and we knew how to market it, and we knew it was going to be non-standard, and it hadn't really been done before, and it had to be that bridge between technology and consumer. And in all honesty, it makes us, all of us that were involved, we all should be pretty proud, because that's where it all ended up in that weird junction between the two. And that was a very early on juncture. I mean, there wasn't much that happened in that space before that time. So it's kind of neat to see it all reoccurring, and obviously at much different quantities and qualities, but it was the same pattern, and it's very interesting to see.
Where are you based now, and what are you doing today?
Well, now I'm actually I stayed in the Valley for Silicon Valley for 25 years, and then I moved out to the Midwest. So I'm actually in sunny Wisconsin, which will not turn sunny and turn snowy in another few weeks for the rest of the year and halfway through next year. I'm involved in marketing and technology to community colleges throughout the states, which is a more of a, it's obviously a passion thing now, but it's very interesting to help people, get into that realm when helping them out where we can, and it's great.
Mm-hmm. What part of Wisconsin are you in?
In La Crosse.
La Crosse, all right.
Yeah, near Minnesota, right on the edge of Minnesota. Okay. And Iowa and stuff, on the corner.
My wife and I honeymooned in Kohler, Wisconsin.
Ah, cool. Yeah, no, I've been there actually. Very nice.
Yeah, it's
very cool.
I like that area. What haven't I asked you about the Atari days that I should have?
Good question. I don't know really. I think I don't think you've missed too much. I mean, the people were the main thing, and it built up a group of people who. I mean, the thing that nobody. Well, I don't know who knows, but that there was a group of people in that era, and they broke away and formed some of the most amazing companies. Do you remember that Teddy Ruxpin and all that?
Sure, Worlds of Wonder. Yeah,
Worlds of Wonder. Well, that was a break off from the sales VP at Atari. I can't remember his name now, but he was the sales VP, and he broke off and started that company with another director called Steve Race. There was that four people that broke off, and obviously that became really good. Nolan, we did Axlon on the other side of that fence. Obviously, Apple was doing its thing at the same time, and there was a lot of people spawned from that beginning of that industry. And it's interesting because you can look at it as they were a group of people, or you can say basically they're all the different things that can spawn out of an industry when you suddenly have consumer level technology. And I tend to look at it that way. It was a transition, and I was incredibly lucky to have been invited in at the beginning, and it's something that very few people get a chance to do, and it's really fun because being in the beginning of that, and then the beginning of there's been a lot of, like mobile, I was involved very early on in that. So there's an awful lot of things that I've been very fortunate enough to be in the beginning of. But that Atari one and what that created just in a short 2 or 3 year span, I don't know if people put the picture together that way. I mean, it's phenomenal what came out. If you draw like an org chart of what came out of that, it's outrageous. Because people look at it as what technologies drove the computer or what technologies drove games. But if you actually look at it, that was the beginning of consumerizing electronics. And that's an outrageous place to be in the 80s, right? It was the place where it all started happening, and it's still happening now. And that's something everybody that I know is very proud to have been part of. And the piece I guess I didn't share with you also, I went to a lot of the overseas when I was in America, I went to a lot of the conferences overseas, so I got to see a lot of competitive products in Japan and in China, actually, and in getting manufacturing set up for some of the products that we had. So it was an interesting sort of massive world tour, and it went from you travel first or business class and stay in the best hotels to how cheap can you do the trip, get your expenses done in front, so you really could see things hitting the wall in amazing slow motion. In 1981, I think it was pretty horrendous.
Oh man.
Yeah, and then coin-op was still around, so that that whole business was a completely separate business. So there were some amazingly talented people there too. So it was kind of interesting. And then when Trammell took over, that was really like a shock to the system for everybody, because one day we were all working, and the next day there was a Rolls Royce parked outside Borregas in the disabled spot, which I guess people phoned the police and had him ticketed and towed, and that was basically the beginning of his introduction. So I guess pretty much everybody left at that point, and his team and the second Amiga thing came in and became the Atari 5200, I believe it was, and that was obviously after I had left the company and was with Nolan at that point. But it's very, very interesting.
I think you mean the Atari ST, but
that's right. Wasn't it called the 520?
Yes, a 520 ST. Yes.
Okay,
but
sorry.
The 5200 was a different animal.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So it was just the most phenomenal number of years when you're following that kind of growth and that kind of change, and then cell phones came out of it and all stuff. It was phenomenal. It was a whole an industrial revolution happened all over again, and we were all right in the middle of it, which was pretty cool.
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. All right, so if you could send a message to the people who are still using Atari computers today, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Oh, now that's a tough question. I just tell them that just imagine if they use it. Well, you mean using them for gaming and playing with as collector's items? You mean?
Yeah, they're using them for entertainment now, not for useful work. I hope.
That's very true. The word processors on those were pretty amazing. I just say, instead of just looking at it as a game machine, look at it as the beginning of this massive evolution of technology, and you suddenly start seeing it as a small building block and a jigsaw piece in this massive collage of stuff that's happened since. And it's such a part of history. It's amazing, and everybody that has one should be really, really proud of the fact they got it. And I bet you most people's will still work. That's the silly thing. Those things were built they were built so well and so solidly that the people I know I do know people that still have them and are still telling me they can boot them up, which is pretty amazing.
Yes, it is. They're like tanks.
Yeah. Well, pretty tanks.
Yes, much prettier. Yes. Awesome. Well, I think that's all I have, unless there's anything else that...
Oh, I don't think so. I welcome the opportunity to share, though. I thank you very much for that. And I'll give you offline whatever names and addresses or connections that we've talked about that you may not have.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.